Hola a todos, Caro with Mijente here on election day at another conversation that we're having. So, as folks know, today's election day. There is so much at stake for our communities, and we're seeing already, right, like all the coverage of the pundits and the political analysts trying to tell us what's happening. Pero we know that nobody knows better what's really happening on the ground than us who are on the front lines doing the work organizing our communities. So, whether you're watching from home, from work, on your way to the polls, at the polls, your way to the drop box, or anywhere in between. We want you to be a part of these conversations. So the chats are open. Please drop in the chat like what you're witnessing in your community, what you're looking at, any races or propositions, amendments that you're looking at. And yeah, just leave it with that. We're in this together tonight. We're going to keep continuing to bring you conversations and pushing for change, pase lo que pase. I'm here with Erika Almiron, Mi Gente member and longtime Philly organizer. Erika, I'm going to toss it to you for a quick intro, and then we can get started on hearing what's happening on the ground out there.
Yeah, thank you, Caro. Thank you for having me. So excited to be a part of this conversation. Erika Almiron, I'm a longtime organizer in Philly, actually ran for city council twice here in the city. Very proud of both campaigns, have the honor to be the Latina with the most votes ever in the city of Philadelphia, because we ran at large. And now just excited to be working to make sure the city, is like our folks in the city are represented and also in the state, and that Latino voters and our communities get the recognition that we need and the funding and resources that we need to make sure that we are at the
Gracias, Erika. So speaking of Philly voters and voters at large in Pennsylvania, can you tell us a little bit about the energy, like como se siente, the mood on the ground today? What are you hearing from voters, from community members as they head to the polls?
Yeah, I had a really good conversation with folks at the polls. I feel that like throughout the day, there seems to be more energy. There's a lot of, there have been some exciting, Joy to the Polls has been kind of an exciting movement here in the city where a lot of the polling locations have DJs out front. So it's DJs at the polls. And I think it's bringing a lot of good energy. We've also seen a high number turnout for this election. So I think that gets people really excited. And we also just saw that Trump in the last couple of hours tried to say that Philly had some instances of fraud. And so we imagine that the high turnout is maybe getting him panicked about what that means for the state of Pennsylvania. And so we have an hour left for folks to hit the polls. And my hope is that as many Latinos who are watching that are here, race to the polls if they haven't voted yet.
Gracias, Erika. So tell us a little bit more about Latina voters in Pennsylvania. I know we've seen all of the headlines, we've heard it said, but how decisive are they in determining the total outcome of this election?
The Latino turnout is so vital to the state of Pennsylvania, for it is the largest electorate, right? We have the largest number of electorates. Of the swing states, we're the largest of the swing states. It is so close based on the polls. And just Puerto Rican voters in the state is 3.5% of the state, which is the largest number. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans who live here. That doesn't include all of the Latinos that live across the state. When it's this close, the Latino vote becomes what will determine the state of Pennsylvania. And it is something that I think I've kind of screamed for a very long time, the need to invest in the state for Latino voters, to make sure that we are prioritizing them, because when it comes down to the wire, at the end of the day, it will be our people who will decide this election, if it is based on Pennsylvania numbers. It's no coincidence in the state. They are very clear about how important the state of Pennsylvania is. And so we need to make sure that we're prioritizing our people in that too.
Absolutely. And you touched a little bit just about like the rhetoric that Trump is putting out there about there being fraud. So, like, let's talk a little bit about some of that rhetoric that's being pushed, right? Recently, I'm sure I'm sure a lot of folks watching know that at a Trump rally, the supposed comedian Tony Hinchcliffe made a really offensive joke calling Puerto Rico, quote, a floating island of garbage. And according to a Univision and YouGov poll, 69% of Latino voters in Pennsylvania found the remarks more racist than they did humorous. And 71% of Puerto Rican respondents said the comments reflected underlying racism in Trump's campaign. So, how are you seeing the Latina community in Pennsylvania kind of respond to that rhetoric? Has it fired people up to get more engaged in the election? And what role did those comments play in motivating our gente to push back at the polls?
I think those comments motivated people tremendously. I think it was a very important reminder for people about where the Trump campaign situates themselves when it comes to our people. It shouldn't be a reminder, we already know, but I also think it reminded people of his response when Maria hit the island, right? And so that's what I've been hearing a lot from our compas here, is that they don't forget that what happened after Maria was something that they'll never be able to forget. The amount of new immigrants, new Puerto Rican immigrants that have come in, that have migrated from the island to here since then has been enormous. And it is necessary that we involve all of those folks into the process, because they're angry, and they're rightfully angry by what was being said. And I think that we're going to see more and more engagement as we move forward because of that. And I think they'll be surprised, actually. I think those numbers are reflective, but I think those numbers will probably be even better. You can't say something like that about a community and the people and not expect for people to push back. So I do think it's animated people to go to the polls and to vote for our gente, right? To be proud of where we're all from and to make sure that we're voting for the right thing.
Absolutely. Gracias, Erika. Before we jump into our last question, again, I want to encourage folks to share in the chat what they're observing, what they're waiting on, any like races or ballot propositions that y'all are keeping an eye on. We would love to hear them. So, Erika, thanks for sharing about what you've seen. You've been organizing in Philly for years, and something that's come up a lot over the course of our conversations today is this idea que la lucha sigue, right? Like the work continues. It's not just about today. We're not just casting our votes today. We're really like laying the groundwork for the organizing train that we're going to be seeking out. So, looking beyond today, what does building that long-term power look like for your community in Philly, and how are you planning to continue the work after Election Day?
I think this is such a great question, because I think organizing happens every day. And just because it's an election cycle doesn't mean that after tomorrow, all of a sudden, I mean, people should take a rest. But then after that, people should continue to organize. There are so many issues that our communities need to focus on. So given all of the issues in Philly alone, Philly is an interesting place, right? It has a predominantly Puerto Rican population in North Philly that's been around for a very long time. We have a growing Dominican population. We have a long existing Mexican population. And the things that have always excited me has been about building bridges between our communities to fight for the same thing, to be able to be on the same page and not see ourselves as oppositional to each other. So North Philly, South Philly, anytime we could get our Latina folks together to fight is important to me. So I think that's the work. We have to do the work to continuously bring our communities together. And that's why Mijente is so important to me. Shout out to all of the groups doing work in North Philly with our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters. Shout out to Juntos, who I love dearly, and who's always done the work in South Philly and beyond for our immigrant communities and families. And so, yeah, this is not it. This is just a part of it.
It's just a part of it. Gracias, Erika. Any final words that you would like to leave our folks with, folks who are tuning in from all across the country, about Philly, Pennsylvania, or just, what you're expecting tonight as a whole?
I will be at home probably watching everything as intensely as everybody else is. And if you haven't voted yet, please go out and vote. There is still time in Pennsylvania. We've got another hour. Make sure to go to the polls. And this is probably one of the most important elections of our lifetime. And so I implore anybody who hasn't gone out yet to vote, and also to become a Mijente member and get involved because la lucha sigue.
Sigue. Gracias, Erika. And thank you to everybody who has been tuning in over the course of the day. We have a couple of more conversations lined up, so please stay tuned. They're happening at the top of the hour. We are shifting over to Denver next, which is going to be really exciting. So again, gracias, Erika, for sharing space with us. And thank you to everybody who has tuned in and will continue to tune in throughout the night.
Thank you, Caro. Thank you for having me.